Hello class, welcome back. This will be lecture 2 for week 1 for Marketing 120. And today I'm going to speak a little bit more about business actually in action, because we did an overview of business in general and also marketing and some of the essentials that go with that. Now I'm going to be talking about just how various businesses actually operate and some of the key assets and factors that go into success and failures when it comes to organizations in general, as far as what makes or breaks certain companies. So what I like to talk about, and one of my favorite things to discuss in class, is examples of successes and failures, case studies, so to speak, of things that went right and wrong, and companies that do good things and companies that didn't do good things and ended up either bankrupting an organization, putting them out of business, or just really, really hurting them overall. And so uh, because I always discuss with students and and research and things of that nature. And it's very interesting to see what companies excel and which ones don't. It typically comes down to a handful of decisions and some good foresight and thinking of exactly where the masses, the market, and the customer base is going to go, and making accommodations to that situation and choosing right, so to speak, as far as when they start to choose their path of where they're going to go from there. So with that being said, I'd like to just jump into a few companies that we're going to start with successes, and then we'll work into the failures, because it's always easy to put the successes on a pedestal and just kind of discuss what they did right and how they actually rose to power, so to speak, as far as the organization is concerned. One company I always like to talk about is Uber, for instance. We all know what Uber is. It's a share ride application that allows us to get a ride from a contracted individual that uses their own car to cater us or drive us, cart us around from destination to destination for a short fee. That's done all transactionally electronically, so we don't have to use any cash. We don't have to have any cash on hand. We don't have to use our credit card to hand to the driver. Everything is done in mode and quick and easy. And an ingenious idea for shared economy structures have become more and more popular, especially in this day and age in this economic structure that we have today. And so it's definitely a great thing. But anyway, Uber themselves, okay, they were founded back in 2009, so it's not a very old organization. It's about 10 years old, by Garrett Camp and Travis Kalnick. They originally called it Uber Cab. They actually had to, get that because when they first launched in 2010, they were immediately hit with a cease and desist order having cab in their name, and every cab organization in the country went after them. To pretty much, they saw the writing on the wall that this could be a threat to the cabbing industry and the riding industry, as far as the cabs, limos, black cars, etc., etc., that will actually hurt them. So they went after them pretty hard, but they made adjustments. In 2000, the following year, they took the cab out of the Uber name, so it just became Uber instead of Uber Cab. So that way they didn't have to worry about cab companies trying to distinguish them as doing something improper. Now, the key thing that happened for Uber, and the funny story I like to talk about, is that the way that these two guys came up with this company is they both are going to a conference together, and they had to share a ride, so they booked a black car, not a limousine, not a cab, but there's black car services where pretty much just a random regular vehicle, and a driver will show up, typically a nice Lincoln, Cadillac, something of that nature, that will cart you around. And it was a pretty expensive trip to take them from the airport to the destination that they were looking to go for, and they just looked at each other and thought there had to be a better way. And both of them at the time had sold their current companies, and were looking for another venture to go into, and so they partnered and went after this application structure for it. And so in 2011, as they were first launched with just 3 cars in San Francisco, just playing around with it, in 2011, excuse me, they were able to generate almost $40 million in funding from various investors to push the company over. And even in that year of 2011, with 40 million in funding, they operated at a loss, specifically because of so much research and design and development that went into actually getting this application exactly how they wanted to, building out the infrastructure, the payment structure, the security measures, the contracts, and all that robustness that went to it, and also fighting political climates for certain cities and states that were trying to keep them away and out of it. But anyway, operated a loss because it was a very expensive venture, but the upturn was fantastic. I mean, the company exploded, and by 2018, which was last year, the revenues were $11.3 billion. Now, they had some rough times with leadership because the people that they originally put into leadership roles weren't really cut out for that kind of situation. So it had some rough turmoil as far as organizational structure and turnover and things of that. And they had some legal stuff, of course, with their drivers being contracted and not having background checks and not really doing much of a vetting process for people that drive for them. They ran into many issues with the drivers being assaulting, disruptive, just bad stuff that came from that. So Uber had to make adjustments, and now their key goal in their organizational function and strategic plan is to eventually get the drivers out of the company completely, and to eventually focus on everything being self-driving and automated. So they're really pushing for that situation to happen. And so predictions with Uber is kind of fun because they could either have hit another home run, and this organization can transcend and become like the standard of share ride for self-driving vehicles to come pick you up, or they could be hedging their bets and the technology doesn't get there and they can just start hemorrhaging money and losing battles with their current drivers who are trying to unionize and trying to get benefits and things of that nature and try to become full-on employees. And they might have to go that route as far as actually having full employee Uber drivers as opposed to doing the contract messing. But anyway, of course, I'm given a bunch of afterthought issues that any of us would love to have for an organization that grew so fast. Like, this is a company that's less than 10 years old and was able to generate from $0 to $11 billion in that time frame, which is almost unheard of in most industries and areas. But they found a niche, they pushed it, the masses are ready for it, accepting of it, the technology was there to support it, and they just grew like a weed. And now they have competitors. There's like Lyft and a few others that are out there that do a similar process. But for the most part, they're the standard when it comes to the share ride infrastructure. And they're getting into Uber Eats and a bunch of other stuff. So the future looks pretty bright for them as far as that's concerned. Another one I like to always talk about is Netflix, because they've been around for a bit of time now. Many of you might just remember Netflix as a streaming service, and that's pretty much it. But back in the 90s, they actually were a online DVD rental store, and so because they were founded in 1997, and in 1998 they launched the first online DVD rental store. And the funny part about this, the original founder of Netflix wanted to start this organization because he accidentally forgot that he rented something from Blockbuster. He held it for way too long and then returned it and had to pay them like $40 in late fees because he held the movie too long. And he thought that was just ridiculous and not needed. I mean, he could have bought many copies. He could have bought a few copies of that DVD. Well, at the time, maybe like 2 or 3 copies of that DVD for $40. But anyway, so he thought there was a better way. And so founded the company in 1997. 1998 launched their first ever online DVD rental store where you actually picked out DVDs via online and they were mailed to you, because that's how things worked back then. There wasn't a streaming service. There wasn't instant downloads. Connectivity and internet connections were not super fast. So like the idea of downloading a full movie onto your computer in the late 90s was a very painstaking and long-winded process to do. And there was no web development or, like I said, streaming service that you could just patch into it. Anyway, so when they started, and then eventually they started not just a rental store, they started with a DVD subscription platform. So we all pretty much, most of us have a Netflix subscription or know of someone or have a household with it. They also, their subscription was originally started as a DVD platform, meaning that you would pick anywhere from 1 to 3 movies off of their storefront. They would mail those to you. You would hold them for as long as you needed to. And then when you wanted to interchange them for a new title or a different movie, you simply would select that, send back the old movie, and they'd send you the new one. And it was just a very, simple process that probably had a lot of logistical nightmare to it and a lot of backlog, but it wasn't that hard to facilitate. And they charged a minuscule DVD subscription fee for you to have the ability to trade in, have these DVDs, and you could keep movies for as long as you wanted to. You just send them back when you were done and get a new one when you did. And it worked out for everybody. Now, so it's kind of funny because it's unheard of now. Most people don't even have tangible media in their home. But In the late 90s and early 2000s, it was a standard to have DVDs, CDs, and intangible media items. So the physical mailing of movies was the only way to do that, and you would have to actually send them back. They would send you pre-postage, of course, so you just drop it in your mailbox. It was quite an easy transition for it. The funny part about Netflix is actually in 2000, when they were somewhat losing a bit of money, and they weren't trending up. They were trending upward, but they were losing a lot of money hedging their bets and putting a lot of money into the company. Blockbuster actually offered to buy them in 2000 for $50 million outright, because the company wasn't worth nearly as much as that at that point. But the company told them to go kick rocks, and thought they were worth more, and they were onto something that was going to be better. Because at that time they started murmuring and thinking about eventually trying to do some kind of a streaming-based service when that happened. And so they were getting, an idea of that being something that was going to be a possibility later down the line when the technology could support it. But anyway, so instead of selling out to Blockbuster and taking the buyout, they housed in, and then eventually what they did a couple years later, they set up and they went public. Which going public or setting up an IPO, which is initial public offering on an exchange, that is not a quick process. That typically does take anywhere from like almost a year, if not longer, to facilitate that, to get approvals for it, and to set it into motion in place. So when they did that, when they went into public, they generated a huge amount of money to able to back the situation, and grow the company. So they were not at that point going to be in a position for anybody to ever try to offer to buy them. But Blockbuster sadly gave them a shot, and they told them to go F themselves, and the future is how it's well, it is what it is. So the funny part about well, not the funny, the smart thing about Netflix though is that they did see the writing on the wall, and they did make a solid prediction on what was going to happen for the organization, or what was going to happen for media later on. And so they put a lot of money into the infrastructure, the setup, because setting up a streaming-based service is not an easy thing to set up and have as far as like running. They officially added streaming service as part of their DVD subscription platform in 2010. So with your Netflix subscription, you got two different things. You got the subscription of the streaming service that would work off of the application on your TV, or uh, or your computer, or you would be able to still get DVDs. Typically, I think it was like two or three that you'd be able to still interchange if you wanted to. And they had a couple different membership packages that went with it. And then also in 2010, that's when they actually started to make their own content, and like they make their own not so much movies, but their own shows, their own like little shorts and things of that nature, which is that's now it's become a very much standard. It seems like Netflix has a new movie or new TV show or new something that's Netflix original that comes out every like day. It seems like, but so anyway. Fast forward to 2019, they have roughly 148 million subscriptions to Netflix, and so the revenue as of 2018, they haven't registered exactly everything they ran into this year, but it's going to be higher, is $16 billion. So a company that started in the late 90s, that's less than 30 years old, is generating $16 billion in revenue streams from their subscription base, with no actual tangible product line or backlog or anything of that nature. I'm sure they got those DVDs somewhere still, but for the most part, they hedged their bet on a future technology that they thought would work, and they were correct. And they were the first on the scene for a fully functional set streaming-based service that was that the public offering actually took and wanted to have. They made it simple. They made it easy to navigate. When they first launched, they didn't have a ton of titles. It wasn't really robust. There was very limited amount of movies that were on there compared to what's on there now, and they didn't have all the the Paramounts and the Miramaxes and the big studios backing them at that time, because Blockbuster and typical tangible media was still there, and so that was always going to be a situation. But they still were able to promote that and make it work, both with their DVD and their streaming service. So fantastic job at Netflix. And now if I had to make predictions now, because I always like to think about the future, they do have quite a bit of competition, and now it seems like every network, every company that has any decent content is started to breaking off, making their own Disney, and is starting their own streaming service that's going to have Marvel movies and Disney movies and shows and all the other stuff that's attached to it, which is going to be cool to watch. And then like you have the the Hulus, you have the Amazon. Amazon has their own streaming service and movies and things of that nature. HBO Now, Stars, uh, Cinemax, they all pretty much have their own streaming setup to fight it out pretty much with Netflix. But Netflix still is the largest and most standard one that's there. Uh, and of course, I can't ever talk about companies that made good decisions and set standards without talking about Amazon. Um, you know, I always say that Amazon slowly is turning into the new Walmart, which is not a compliment in any way, shape, or form. But so anyway, so we all know Jeff Bezos was the one that created Amazon. He started it. He had an idea to create an online bookstore in the early '90s, and excuse me, oh, sorry about that. He had an idea to start an online bookstore in the early '90s, and he founded it in 1994. And he started an online bookstore. Amazon only sold books when they first started. That's all they did. Not Kindle readers. They're not electronic books. These were physical books that they were going to mail to you. We didn't have e-readers at the time. And so the thing about uh, Amazon is that they were churning and burning and doing decent as far as what you would expect an online bookstore to do in the '90s. And eventually, in 1997, they decided to go public, but they did a very strategic thing. Bezos and his leadership staff said to the investors and made it very, very vocal and notable that they were not going to pay out dividends or bonuses or structures of that nature. Everything was going to be paid directly back into the organization. And so with that, any profits or revenues were dumped back into the organization, and so they just kept reinvesting, and it showed its losses basically. So it did not post a profit until almost 4 years later when they felt that they were at where they needed to. But they made a key indicator, and I'm pretty sure that that's where they were trying to go in that time period anyway, is in 2001 they started to add third-party sellers and other products, because Bezos and his crew had the thought process that online retail and online sales of items was going to eventually become the standard. In the 90s and early 2000s, it was not. It was a very low percentage of things purchased online. It was not a common thing. People were not doing Christmas shopping and random purchases and having things bought online very often. It was a very low percentage of things that were purchased online. I think it was like below 10% of all retail items were purchased online at the time. So it's a very low amount. Anyway, to get back to it. So in 2001, they made a strategic idea to start adding third-party sellers and other products because right now they started as an online bookstore. That's all they had. They didn't have the infrastructure warehouses that they do now that sell millions of different items. So in order for them to be able to, they really sophisticated their retail platform of what we shop on now, and then they invited other products, third-party sellers, and people that were trying to get a voice or trying to showcase their products to individuals onto their platform. And so they would charge a small fee, which they still do. They still charge it's not that bad of a fee to get listed onto Amazon. And then from there, anybody that uses Amazon or has Amazon membership or just shops on Amazon directly will be able to view the products based on the search. So if you're a company that makes, let's say, a very unknown wireless headset or wireless headphones, right? Because the big name players in wireless headphones is like Bose and a few others, and like Nike and like a few other like brand names that you can only find if you go to a retail store, they'll be ones that kind of like shove down your throat. But you go to Amazon and you'll find all these weird, like these brands that you've never heard of, significantly cheaper because they're not spending a ton of money on the marketing. The product is adequate and can work, but might not be the most high-end version of it in general. So what used to cost $100 to $150, you can buy for $20 to $30 based off of that product listing. So anyway, long story short, they opened up the market to many unknown name, not brand name companies, more independent entrepreneurs, smaller organizations to be able to get a very good voice and platform to sell their products and services. And for them, they were able to get a huge audience of people shopping on their site because they wanted a ton of traffic. That was the whole goal and the whole purpose of it. But anyway, so they made a strategic plan that was going to happen because they thought retail online sales was going to become the standard. And so, even as of today, about 50% of all the products sold on Amazon are from third-party sellers. And you probably know this because we all shop on Amazon because we have to, because we've become accustomed to the quick delivery. But anyway, when you buy it from it, if you buy it from, can tell easily the difference if you're buying something it's Amazon stocked or if it's not, because you're going to get a third-party receipt. It might take a little bit longer to get to you, and it's typically going from a different seller that's actually going to be sending you the item. We've all bought things of that nature. So, but again, about half the products that are sold on Amazon are by third parties, and they've done that strategically so that way they can have a very robust product listing. It makes us all always shop Amazon for whatever things that we're needing, whether it's clothes, whether it's technology, whether it's hardware, software, whatever random things we're thinking about, shoes, whatever, ties, dress pants. We will start by going to Amazon and we'll look at there to see the price comparison and the different brands that they have and different options. Anyway, the key thing about Amazon is one of their main modes of income is not technically the sale of all the products on their platform, because they make money on that, of course, but it's not a high percentage. They pretty much make most of their money on the traffic from advertising and from getting people to pay for additional ad space, preferable listings, and things of that nature on their sites, similar to how Google does it as far as profitability for ads, and same with Facebook. But anyway, they are the most popular advertising network after Google ads, and they pretty much go back and forth, and Amazon's even getting very popular, especially in the retail market, for anybody that wants to do ads on their sites, because they have so much traffic, they have so much audience. And a good example of this I always bring up is that whenever you are looking at an item on Amazon, or you buy an item on Amazon, right, when you're in the process of it, when you go down a little bit to make when you agree to the purchase or you're starting to move on, there's always a listing of products that match it, or similar items, to try to basically give you a comparison of what else is out there. That's an advertising ploy that those companies pay for, to be pushed into the limelight to go against certain makes. You also can see things that were typically bought by other individuals. That's another actually advertising setup that's done through their facilitation. And so they do these things. And then also I always joke and say, you ever looked at something on Amazon, then you leave the Amazon site, you go to a random site and start looking at ESPN.com or GameStop or something of that nature, and then you'll see on the side of your screen there's that same Amazon product just kind of blinking in your face nonstop. Again, these are all paid advertising setups from Amazon, from the vendors that actually are on there. So it's a huge revenue stream that works through it. Now, it's a little dated, but as of 2015, their profitability was $107 billion. In 2019, it's projected to be well over 300. So it's well taking off as far as that is concerned. And then they've had a slew of operational issues and a lot of bad press when it comes to how they treat their employees in the facilitation and the procurement and the delivery setup of that. But for the most part, they're pretty much taking over the world very slowly and surely. And they've also set the standard they've changed the whole game of shipping and receiving for us as consumers. They've made it so prevalent that we've become such an instant gratification society based on, I can buy something off of Amazon and it's certain, and I'm a Prime member, so at some cases I can receive that item the same day. If not, worst case scenario, it'll be the next day that I will receive this item, as long as it can be facilitated, as long as it can be fulfilled through Amazon. They can guarantee that it will be at your doorstep at least by the next day, which has set a huge precedence and made a huge dent into the way that we ship and receive items and the expectations that consumers have for when they buy items online. Because I can laugh about it now, but I'm pretty sure all of us can agree that when we're buying an item, if we have to wait 5 to 7 days to get it, we start to hem and haw and think about somewhere else that we might go. And honestly, you might pay for an Amazon you might find the same product on a different vendor's site, but you have to wait longer to get it. You'll pay, and if you find the same product on Amazon for a little bit more expensive, you'll pay for it because you'll get it you'll get it faster. And so we pay for that preference, depending on the need, of course. But anyway, yeah, they don't pay their employees as well as they should, but it's with all the money that they're making. But but they've made some very strategic and smart decision making when they go into that, and it shows because that organization is running very effectively. It's very profitable and has completely changed the standards of how we do a lot of stuff when it comes to artificial intelligence, when it comes to TV. I mean, I always joke and say eventually you're going to drive your Amazon car and eat your Amazon dinner inside your Amazon house watching Amazon TV. And that's where we're kind of going to be heading on your Amazon internet service provider as well. Anyway, so now we can take a segue because I talk about the ones that made really good decisions and are kind of like setting the world on fire, so to speak, as they're moving through. But of course, you can't have the yin without the yang, and then the failures are actually honestly, are more prevalent than the successes. Successes are much more rare than business failures because that's just the name of the game, and sadly, that's how it works. Anyway, I love talking about Blockbuster videos. Some of you may or may not know what Blockbuster is. I feel old saying that, but hopefully you all know what I'm talking about. But Blockbuster was a actual retail store that you went in and you would rent, when they first started, VHS cassette tapes, because that's how movies were watched in the late 70s and 80s. And so these were actually tapes that had tape in them, and you had to actually push it into a VCR, and it would actually run the reel, and that's how it would play your videos. You had to rewind them to actually watch the movie again. There was no skipping. There was no chapter readings as far as that is concerned. It was pretty much just a fast forward and rewind setup to actually watch the films. And then over time, the tape would wear, and it would give a lot of traction and a lot of staticky on the screen, and the quality would go down. But anyway, if you know what I'm talking about, laugh about it a bit. But if you don't, good for you. You're never going to have to feel those pain points that I did as a child. Anyway, the first store for Blockbuster opened up in 1985. Like I said, they were renting tangible media items at the time, which, like I said, were VHS tapes, were VHS movies that people were renting to use in their VCRs and watch at home. So they grew very, very quickly with this model because VHS tapes at the time were fairly expensive, and not everybody even owned a VCR at the time. So it was more of a luxury item, and the movies themselves were pretty expensive, so they were thriving quite well because it was much cheaper to simply rent and bring back than it was to do any other mode of media purchasing. Anyway, so in less than 5 years, they started to even go international. And so in 1990, they decided to go, they went international. Before they started having their downfall, there was up to 4,000 locations in the U.S. alone and 2,500 locations international. So think about that. That's 6,500 locations throughout the world. The actual physical retail locations. That's a lot of locations to have for an organization. And they were all franchised, which just kind of give you a quick idea a quick synopsis of what the difference between a franchise and a corporate-owned organization is. So Starbucks, for instance. Starbucks are corporate owned, meaning that they do not have individual owners that own any of those storefronts. They're all owned by Starbucks. That's it. A McDonald's, a Blockbuster, Subway, and a few others, I can just keep going on, they're considered franchises. Now, the difference between a franchise and a corporate-owned storefront is a franchise does have actual individual owners. These individual owners pay almost like a membership fee to call themselves that name, to have that franchise tag, and then they have to abide by all the franchise, the company's standards, colors, recipes, all their stuff that they put into play. They have to set that standard for it. They have to use the same POS system. They have to make sure everything is to the code that specific corporate entity wants them to, but they actually own that storefront. And so when a company is franchised, a single owner can own a bunch of different franchise locations. So let's say if you wanted to open a McDonald's, you would purchase into McDonald's to have the rights to own an actual McDonald's storefront. They would help zone you into like an area that you can go into that's not too close to another McDonald's, and then you would have to make sure that they would send you all the stuff that needed to set up that store to be exactly what a McDonald's would expect to be. And you have to just pay a royalty every month to them in order for you to keep calling yourself McDonald's and to have the resources at your disposal from that organization. Hopefully that makes sense. Anyway, so Blockbuster was a franchise, and then also it was speculated that around 43 million households had memberships to Blockbuster, because all you pretty much had to do was sign up and give them your phone number, and that you would be able to get a Blockbuster membership. It wasn't really like a extravagant or a secluded thing. But anyway, they made a very, very strategic mistake choice. Instead of, I talk about like, Uber and Amazon and Netflix making very smart decisions that ended up paying out. They made a decision that didn't pay out, and so they were starting to get into the streaming. Like I told you guys before, they tried to buy Netflix and failed back in 2000 because they liked the mail-in service and they wanted the infrastructure, and Netflix didn't go for it. So they tried to duplicate the service. They couldn't really do it. Didn't really get a setup for it with the kiosk and the actual tangible medias. But what they started to get into is they thought about doing the streaming, and they made a single mistake of they linked up with DirecTV, and so their streaming service was typically for premiere movies, kind of like pay-per-view, so to speak, if you remember what pay-per-view was. And so they would facilitate this, and it actually was losing money for them because it wasn't generating a lot of profit, because people don't purchase pay-per-view movies on a consistent basis. It's kind of when a new title comes out, there's going to be a continuous buy-up for a short duration of time, and then it just fades. So they were actually losing money facilitating this possible streaming setup through DirecTV on the newest titles that they had availability to. So they got rid of any of the streaming version, and they invested a lot into their mail service because they wanted to set up one that was similar to like how Netflix was doing it at the time, even though in 2009 they kind of missed the boat on that. And then also more locations and making them more robust. And so that ended up being a poor choice, because less than a year later they had to file for bankruptcy, because at that time, pretty much in 2010, that's when Netflix decided to go fully streaming, and then you had the kiosk systems pretty much being implemented. You had Redbox starting to come out. Netflix was still doing their DVD mail and rental, but streaming started to make its presence known, and people started to get kind of, not needing to go into a Blockbuster to get anything at that point. And so with a handful of bad choices, that company went from one of the largest one of the largest organizations in the United States to bankrupt pretty quickly. So sad but true. And now there's only pretty much one Starbucks. Not Starbucks. There's one Blockbuster that still exists, and it's only because the franchise is gone. Like, Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore, but the store actually is there and still calls himself Blockbuster, which they're free to do because the corporate entity went belly up. They're more free. They can call it whatever they want at that point, because the copyrights and trademarks don't exist. The trademarks don't hold after the company goes bankrupt or goes out of business, and so they just call themselves Blockbuster to do so. Anyway, Circuit City. If you remember Circuit City, yay. If you don't, it was kind of like a Best Buy. Best way I can explain it. So they were actually founded a long, long time ago in 1949 as Ward's Company. That's what they were founded as. Now, eventually they transitioned their name in 1984 to Circuit City when they went public and started generating more storefronts. They were actually pretty well established and doing quite well, and were very popular at that time. And then what they did is, a couple years later, they changed into more of a superstore setup and sold more electronics, and introduced in the plug design that, if you remember what they looked like, it was kind of like a giant. They tried to make themselves look like an outlet plug. They didn't really look like that. It was just a giant kind of looked like a 3-story building that wasn't really 3 stories. But anyway, it was a very blocky, kind of squarish, rectangular building that they built out for their design. But they became more of an electronic type superstore in the late 80s. And they sold everything. I mean, all electronic based stuff, but one of the biggest sellers that they had were appliances. And at the time, when the late 80s into the early 90s, appliance sales were actually like a pretty big thing that were pretty much holding what that's what Sears was a staple for, is appliances, which you may or may not know. And then right behind them was Circuit City at the time. Uh, this is before Home Depot started offering them, or Lowe's was really in existence, and then also Best Buy didn't have. Best Buy wasn't really pushing, and they didn't really have any uh, uh, appliances as well. So they were, kind of the only name in the game when it came to appliances, and they were second largest appliance retailer in the U.S. This is fridges, washers and dryers, um, dishwashers, those big items, ovens and stoves, ranges. Those are pretty big items that people purchase on a consistent basis. So anyway, uh, in 2000, Best Buy became, you know, kind of pushed itself out there and was new and beating them badly in the electronics field. So Best Buy got really well known and still known for electronics, and I do quote unquote electronics because they're very kind of like run of the mill brand name version of it. So what they also decided to do in 2000 was Circuit City decided to abandon this money making portion of their organization because they wanted to kind of fight it out with Best Buy to be like the superstore electronic store that was out there. So they abandoned appliances and they focused on other products and other technical based stuff. Sad part, uh, that really hemorrhaged and hurt them as an organization. They started losing money immensely. So through the 2000s, they kept losing money, and then what they did is they started cutting wages of their workers and started cutting bonuses on their sales staff, and started getting less incentive for their sales individuals to sell their products and their services that they offered. So, and with this kind of downward slope that they were putting themselves into in 2008, they tried to sell off portions of the company to stay in business, but it failed. And in 2009, they had to liquidate their stores and they went out of business. So Circuit City doesn't really exist anymore either. I think there's like a essence of them via online, but there's actually no retail locations anymore that they used to do. So, like I said, a very large company that just made a lot of made a handful, actually not a handful, a bunch of bad decisions that just slowly kind of creeping up on them until they put themselves out of business. Divesting away from one of their top selling items and one of their biggest money makers in their storefronts, big mistake there. Another one was starting to cut the commission structures and the pay of their sales staff because that's not an incentive for people to move products and services. And slowly but surely, uh, went out of business. All right. Last one, but not least, Kodak. You probably don't know what Kodak is unless you're maybe my age or, well, no, you may or may not know what Kodak is. But I'll just tell you this: Kodak. I'm from upstate New York. Kodak is from Rochester, New York, and it's pretty much was the end all be all camera and film organization. Pretty much most of the 20th century, and so they made cameras, they made film. George Eastman, in the early 1900s, used to go door to door selling his cameras to people. A very, very rudimentary and very, very stagnant type technology back then, but it got more sophisticated over the years. Anyway, so like I said, George Eastman founded the company in 1888. Uh, that's when he actually started selling those cameras door to door. Was, like I said, the very early 1900s. Now, even as, and of course, Eastman and his family were always owners of this organization, but by 1976, because this is a company that's been around for almost 100 years at this point, in 1996, they accounted for 90% of film and camera sales worldwide. Like, they were the end all be all of cameras and film. And so this is back when cameras actually you had to actually put film in the cameras and then take film out and develop the film. This predates any type of digital photography whatsoever. And so they were it. Like, if you needed a high-end camera, you needed high-end film, you needed film developed, you were buying Kodak stuff. That's just what they did. And back in 1996, the top level of their profits was $16 billion. And in the late 90s, that was deemed a lot of money. I know nowadays it doesn't seem as much compared to like an Apple or a Google or a Netflix or an Amazon. But in 1996, it was one of the top tier organizations for money making as far as like revenue streams. Now, the key issue that Kodak fell into, which many organizations you can assume are this old might do, is that they did not adopt to the digital age of film very fast. So when other Japanese-based technological companies started pushing out more digital-based cameras that would have memory cards that would take photos, digitally, that could be printed, they looked at it as more of a, not a niche, but it's a commodity that some people would want, but people would still prefer film because, like I said, they had been around for 100 years making film and cameras and developing film and making the chemicals for the film and putting in the proper paper and the film, the film paper that you would develop pictures off of. They pretty much made all of those products, so they were like, look, we're ingrained in everything. We don't really need to worry about this digital thing, right? And if your company's been around for over 100 years and you're the top dog in your market and industry, you're really not too afraid of something of that nature. But at that point, they should have kind of adopted, but they didn't fast enough. But when they finally did decide to adopt, okay, in 2001, they started adopting into the digital camera age. They made their own digital camera and they pushed into it. So in 2001, they actually eventually fought their way back up into the second spot of digital camera sales again. But I always discuss this because in business school, we learned specific ways of residual income as customer base and loyalty, right? There's a method that we learn specifically called the razors method, and I always use the application for you guys so you can understand a little bit better is how consoles and games work as far as profiteering. So we all know, it's kind of common knowledge, that if you buy an Xbox, a PlayStation, those consoles themselves are worth more than we pay for them, all right? So the Sonys of the world, Microsoft, they'll take a small loss on the actual product line, the actual main hub of the product, because they know they'll make it up with the residuals that you're going to buy for it. The add-ons, the memory space, the games, the controllers, the other components that they have to put onto it, any upgrades and additives that you add to it. They use that console, like I said, they take a small loss to make you hooked on their product line. And it's an ingenious method, but the problem is if you don't have a product that needs constant care and constant other additional purchases, then you losing money on the initial product sale becomes detrimental to your organization, right? So think about it this way: if you bought your Xbox for $400, but it took Microsoft $450 to make the Xbox, right, that they sold to you. Now we all know that we have to buy games. We're going to purchase another controller. We're going to purchase some upgrades, a bunch of other stuff that goes with it. Before we know it, we're probably like $1,200, $2,000 in to this item that we've put in money into it. And the games cost them nothing to make because now they're all not even tangible. They just you just download them. Anyway, get off topic. But the key thing is, now think about if you were to buy your Xbox for the same price and never had to purchase another thing to go on top of it ever. So you sent that company, you pretty much would end up bankrupting and putting the company out of business because they're selling a product for less than it takes for them to actually make it. And that's where Kodak put themselves in, because they were trying to do this method, because in their eyes, when you bought a camera in 1970 or 1980, you bought a camera, you had to buy film for it, you had to buy lenses, you had to buy bulbs, and then not only were you consistently buying film, because film didn't last forever, it had a shelf life, and if you held it for too long, you'd have to get rid of it and buy a new one. And then when you put film in the camera, after you took all the pictures that were allocated, you'd have to take the film out, get it developed, and constantly do it. And so it was a huge residual income that would come from an initial camera sale to their clients. But sadly, with a digital camera, is there really that much that you could add onto it? Maybe an additional memory card, maybe a better lens, and that's pretty much it. There's not this consistent upkeep to make sure that camera is functional. And so losing money on their cameras every single sale, they were not recouping on their additional products. And then so they held this out for about 10 years before eventually they went bankrupt. They did emerge back in 2013 as an organization, but they're quite a shadow of what they used to be, because they pretty much used to employ anywhere from 50 to 60,000 people, and now they maybe employ 30 to 50. So it's quite a big leap back. But anyway, so in conclusion, I always like to discuss successes and failures of organization, because like I say, when you're thinking about business needs and minds, I mean, it could take just a couple steps this way, a couple steps that way, and you can either just destroy the organization, or you can transcend the company with a couple good choices. But always base your decisions on market climate, where you think the trends are going, and then especially nowadays, where the tech trends are taking you. Because as most of these companies I talk about that went out of business, it's because they didn't adapt to the technological advances that they were going to, and they decided to go into markets that weren't their strongest suit. And so always keep that in mind when you're looking into them. So for that, I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and we will do this again.